Welcome to Tokyo Game Life, a Tokyo-based video game podcast focusing on Nintendo and gaming culture in Japan's capital. Your host Mono here to bring you a slice of gaming life from Tokyo. Game localizer Stephen Meyerink joins to chat about Final Fantasy Tactics, the Ivalice Chronicles. We dig into the new additions to this classic game, dive deep into its localization history, and chat about why this game is so great nearly 30 years later. Plus, in the feature, I take you inside the brand new Sega Store Tokyo in Shibuya. Let's get into the games with Stephen Meyerink and Final Fantasy Tactics, the Ivalice Chronicles. Today in the game section, we are looking at Final Fantasy Tactics, the Ivalice Chronicles, the newest version of the classic 1997 strategy RPG from Square Enix. Joining me to chat all about this entry in the iconic Final Fantasy spin-off series is a special guest. So guest, please introduce yourself.
Yes, hello, I am Guest, and by guest, I mean I am Stephen Meyerink. I guess my first qualification for being here is that I am a big fan of Final Fantasy Tactics. I work in the video game localization industry. I'm a Japanese to English translator and editor. I've worked on lots of video games, manga, comics, books, things like that. Anything that's fun media is the kind of stuff that I like to work on. The reason I do that work is because of Final Fantasy Tactics. I played the original when I was a little kid and loved it. And when it came out on PSP, that version was relocalized. And I've written about this online and I've talked about it a lot, but that relocalization really opened my eyes to how powerful translation is as an art form and really made me excited about language because I had always been into language and writing in English, but made me realize the sort of power that a good localization can have to completely shape the tone of an experience. So I regularly tell people that without FF Tactics, I probably wouldn't be doing what I do now.
Thanks for joining me. Yes, you seem to be the perfect guest for this episode. And I also really love this game, so I wanted somebody who knows more about it than I do. So that's why I brought you on. We're going to be mostly digging into the new stuff in this version of the game. And by the end of our chat, you, me, or God will be blamed. But I want to hear your origin story for the series. How did you get into Final Fantasy Tactics?
Like a lot of people probably in 1997, and like Square Enix was probably intending, I really liked Final Fantasy VII, and I saw something else called Final Fantasy. So I picked it up, and, I actually didn't even know that Cloud was in it as an optional character. I was just like, oh, yeah, FF7 was so cool. I loved that game. I was already into RPGs when I played FF7, but that was really where I got really into them. So I had no idea what FF Tactics was. I just knew it was another Final Fantasy. And so I was like, all right. And I had no idea that I could go back and there were several other Final Fantasies as well. I had never had a Nintendo console growing up. I had the Sega Genesis, and I moved to PlayStation, and I didn't get a Super Nintendo until high school. And I went back and played a lot of those older games. For me, it was just like, hey, that thing I liked last year, or it was the same year, I think even, which is wild to think about. I wanted another Final Fantasy, and I got a good deal.
Yeah, I picked up the original on PlayStation, but this was during the PS2 era, so unfortunately, my version of the original game had the dreaded green greatest hits label. It was only $15 though, so I couldn't say no at that price, but I absolutely loved it, albeit I did think it was very hard, something we'll get into. But this is really when I fell in love with the job system of the Final Fantasy series as a whole, something many people are experiencing now with this new version. And I typically don't replay a lot of RPGs, but Final Fantasy Tactics is a very replayable game. And I'm having a great time with this new version. A bit of history about the Ivalice Chronicles. Final Fantasy Tactics originally appeared in the NVIDIA leak in 2021, so it's something people have been expecting for a long time. And it was finally revealed at the June State of Play this year. What was your reaction upon seeing the direction Square was taking with this new version of FFT?
Mostly just abject joy. Finally, if anyone has had the misfortune of following me on social media, they would know that every time there was a big gaming event, especially a Nintendo Direct or a State of Play, anything like that, I had a folder on my computer that I've been building up over the last 4 or 5 years of really bad memes for celebrating the release or the announcement of whatever this remaster was going to be called. So I was thrilled. Direction-wise, I would say I love retro games. I am not nearly a hardliner the way a lot of people in the retro game community are in terms of this has to look pixel perfect to the original. I don't want it to look like smeary.
Right.
I was a little iffy on the Tactics Ogre remaster because they had done that smoothing on the sprites. It didn't really bother me, especially from the distance that I was sitting on with the TV. So that's the background. I thought it looked fantastic. I like what they've done with the visuals, especially in the remaster. I think the sort of canvas effect to it adds a really nice warmth and texture to it. I know that there are people out there who are really mad that it's not the original pixel art. or rather the unfiltered pixel art. I get where they're coming from, but I think this is preferable to me than the iOS version, which had HD sprites.
Right.
I didn't really like those HD sprites. They were well put together, but they changed the character of the looks more than this new remaster's visual filter does. And that to me is a bit more egregious than running a filter over it the way they have. In terms of everything else, I had a laundry list of things I wanted from the remaster. I wanted them to keep the War of the Lions localization because I love it, and it can be polarizing in the community, and I appreciate why people perhaps don't like it as much. They've called it purple prose. I disagree. But I do understand that it is a strong creative swing, and so I get why it would ruffle feathers. When they showed Ivalice Chronicle the first time, they made it pretty clear they were not departing from War of the Lions script. I would say I was pretty disappointed that they did not do a rearrangement of the soundtrack because I think it's one of the all-time great game soundtracks. Like Hitoshi Sakimoto's music outfit did such a wonderful job on Final Fantasy XII The Zodiac Age soundtrack and doing the rearrangement of that for that version of the game. My dream version of this game had a remastered soundtrack like that as well, along with the original as an option. So I was a little bummed with that, but I wasn't expecting to get the voice acting. Didn't really think it was necessary, but was quite happy with the bits and pieces they showed of it. And most importantly, they didn't announce this right away, but they said, we want the complete version of, the definitive version of the PS1 version. That to me suggested that they might finally localize the sound novels, which have never been localized into English before. They didn't announce that in that video, but I got a sense that they might be based on how they were framing it. I was really happy when they also revealed that they were doing that. So, yeah, I would say I was really happy with what it looked like. It was a very thoughtful take on the game. I had the utmost confidence that Creative Business Unit 3, which is the Final Fantasy XIV team, who also worked on this, would do justice by this game. I think there's a lot of fans on that team of FF Tactics, so there would be a lot of motivation to help it put its best foot forward. I was curious if they were keeping the War of the Lions content, because I noted that they kind of, in that initial trailer, that there was some hints that they wouldn't be doing that, and then they ultimately didn't. So
I think that original trailer is a bit, I don't want to say misleading, but there's actually more in the game than expected because, to be honest, when they first showed it, I was a little underwhelmed that after all this time, it did look like it was just going to be a straight port of the original, which it's not, but at the time, that's what it kind of looked like. One of the focuses of the dev team is that they wanted to keep it as utterly faithful as possible to the PS1 original. So no content or very limited content from the PSP game and no significant gameplay additions like new classes, for example. Now, obviously, there is quite a lot of new stuff that we're going to get into, but what do you think about the decision overall to focus on the content from the PS1 game as opposed to adding more or making it, for example, Final Fantasy Tactics Deluxe?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the reasoning they give for it makes sense. I think it's a consistent reason of we want to focus on a specific version of the game. And, if you read into that decision a bit more, the original development team, not all of the original development team participated in the development of War of the Lions. Matsuno wasn't involved, I believe. And so I think there is a sense of, hey, we didn't make that content, so we don't want to have to parlay that into working with whatever we're doing now. And I think because Matsuno went back over the script and added a lot to it, I can understand why they opted not to do it because, it's just kind of getting these two different takes on the material to come together might have been a little challenging. I think I kind of agree with you. When you said that the initial trailer didn't really sell how much they were doing, I think they have made a lot of adjustments. For example, in the Elm Door fight, where you can steal the Genji gear, in the original Japanese version, you can't steal the Genji gear. It was only due to a bug in the localized version on PS1 that you could do it, but that became how people knew the game. They updated the release to allow you to do that in Ivalice Chronicles with a day one patch. So I think that to me is like, oh, they really do want to maintain this. I think makes sense to me as a decision. I still think it's a little disappointing. I think what they have done is really great. It's one of those things where as I'm playing it, I'm like, it's hard to imagine going back to the original. I have a save file on War of the Lions that I jumped onto just to compare some lines and stuff. Even the PSP version, it feels a little creakier, and they really did a great job surfacing a lot of stuff that was obscure in the original, like getting quotes from your party members on the menu. They all had something to say. And a lot of people are discovering that for the first time. I saw some posts on Blue Sky that were like, wow, they added dialogue to the characters. And it's like, well, no, that's always been there. They tweaked it, but that was really hard to find in the original. You had to open the menu, open a character up, hit select, scroll over to the character's name, and then hit X on their name, and then they would read dialogues. Obviously, not many people found that. I kind of wish in the initial trailer they had emphasized more how much they were going to be doing, because I think that might have made people who were bummed out about the War of the Lions content not being there, seeing that there actually was something added to this. I have thoughts on how the lack of the War of the Lions content, in particular the late game stuff, kind of affects the flow of the game, but we could save that for later. I don't want to answer 5 questions to the one you asked.
Yeah, since the game still has a lot of the members from the original development team, like Kazutoya Maehiro, who was the event planner on the original, and of course, the father of Ivalice, Yasumi Matsuno, is modifying the script and the scenarios. And I guess we should get into that since localization is your area of expertise. And I would say Final Fantasy Tactics, both the original and War of the Lions on PSP, have some of the most famous localizations. So can you shed some light on both the original PS1 and PSP localizations and what made them stand out?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say what stands out about the PS1 version is that it's hard to follow. As a kid, I didn't really realize that. I played it, it came out in 97, so I was like 10 years old. I didn't realize the localization was bad. I also didn't notice it in FF7. I guess I hadn't experienced enough media or like read enough stuff at that time to be like, wait, something's wrong here. I just thought I was like, oh, this must be some weird way of writing. Of course, why wouldn't a dragon have a bracelet? Stuff like that. So I think what's memorable about it is that the strength of the story still shined through. People still really loved that story before War of the Lions came out. In spite of the rough localization, the original still has that quality to it that is just this really excellent story. And it's such a different kind of story than Final Fantasy VII. For example, when I played it, I was like, wow, this is way different, but really cool. I didn't realize I was going to become a low fantasy nerd the way I did and be into that. I guess it's maybe more high fantasy. I don't know. It's this genre distinction. But yeah, that localization didn't really pick anything until I played it again when I got a little older before War of the Lions came out. And that's when I realized, oh, there's something not quite right here. With War of the Lions, I didn't realize what they did in that localization because, this was when I was in college taking Japanese classes and I was interested in it, but like I hadn't, I didn't have this inkling of like, I'm going to become a translator or something. And then War of the Lions came out and I said, hey, I love Final Fantasy Tactics. I'm going to grab that game and play it on my PSP. And just immediately playing it and be like, what happened here? I really was like, I absolutely hate reading. It blew my young mind. I hate that expression in games writing. But I was just kind of like, what happened here? This is nuts. This is like a different game. It was incredible to me. It really was one of those crystallizing moments you have when you like are figuring out what you want to do in the world. And just the attention to each character's different register and the way the noble people talked using different kinds of vocabulary, not just vocabulary, but also the syntax and the way they structured their sentences versus some of the lowborn people. It's just, there's that line in the first battle when they play the song Trisection for the first time, when one of the thieves is like, well, highborn moppets is still moppets. When I read that, I didn't know what a moppet was. None of that had popped into my head. It characterizes that guy so well in such a short amount of time. Those characters are on screen for 20 minutes max, depending on how long that battle takes. And that's just the first battle. So just the incredible use of language in that. Like any localization, I would argue that there are probably some parts where it could have been edited, and they did in the Ivalice Chronicle, which isn't to say it was a fundamentally incorrect approach, especially when you're writing for voice acting, which we can talk about later. It's a very different challenge than writing for text meant to be read out loud. And some of the lines, I think, either dragged or didn't have enough expressiveness to them. But that would be me picking the teeniest of nits out of that localization. I think, to me, seeing how much more I could learn about these characters and understand them just from the way they were talking. And then, of course, to say nothing of the system text being better localized. Now I could understand parts of this game I loved so much better because it was like, oh, now this description is coherent of how this ability works. In the original, the samurai has blade grasp, which is called Shira Hadori in War of the Lions. At that point in time, blade grasp, I never understood what that meant. I was like, why does blade grasp make attacks miss you? Are you grabbing your own sword harder or something? And obviously Shira Hadori didn't explain that, but it fit the character fiction better. And then that led me into understanding those mechanics better as well. Like, oh no, the samurai, they can clap their hands and catch the blade as it comes down. And that's why bravery affects it, because you have to have enough bravery to let the sword come down and catch it. The original has its charms, and even though I prefer the War of the Lions version of that blame yourself or God line, first of all, War of the Lions has it in a different context, so it necessitated a change. but I get why people love that original line because it sounds really cool. It does not fit Delita's characterization at that point in the story, but I'm being really nitpicky, and that's why to me I'm like, no, they should change that line, no matter how cool it sounds, because it's not appropriate for where he's at in the story
Mm.
there.
Yes, this version of the game is actually two games, technically, the original and the enhanced version, which I'm playing. Now, stay with me, listeners, because it's going to get confusing. The original version includes the Japanese PS1 script, but the English War of the Lions script. And the enhanced version is a modified Japanese script, with the English version being a translation of that modified Japanese script. So there are maybe technically 3 or 4 different scripts in these two games that are in this one bundle. So you spend some time with all three, so I'm going to make you choose. Do you now have a favorite localization of Final Fantasy Tactics?
Probably. It's probably the Ivalice Chronicle version. And that's partially because they have kept a lot of War of the Lions word for word. I've been playing it with a script open in the corner because I'm really invested in the language of this game. And most scenes clearly use the War of the Lions script as a starting point when they needed to change it for voice acting, or where Matsuno altered the dialogue, or where they felt, oh, this line needs to be shorter or it needs to flow differently for voice acting. That's where they tweaked, but they still make use of the same sorts of turns of phrase. You know, like if there's a particularly unique turn of phrase in a line, they usually still keep that turn of phrase. And I think, to me, as I said, I love War of the Lions, but I tend to not want to believe that the things I liked when I was younger cannot be made better. They can be made different, and I don't have nostalgia goggles, really. I mean, I do, obviously, I have nostalgia goggles, but I am to entertain that this new version could be better than the thing that was very formative for me, because I like the idea of media being able to surprise me and give me a reaction like that. So, yeah, I think the Ivalice Chronicle version is probably my new favorite because it is essentially my old favorite, just with another really nice writing pass by the original writer. The Loke team that worked on this are phenomenally talented. I've worked with a few of them, so I'm a little biased in saying that, but I think it's essentially the original script of War of the Lions, but now even better. It's definitely following the same path that that one followed, but just improved. You know, there are some lines that they cleaned up that read even better now. And then there's a lot of the new dialogue that got added that I think slots in extremely well. I think it doesn't feel like however many years between the two versions, it really feels like the new material has slotted in nicely with the old stuff in terms of the localization style and quality.
It is kind of hard to deny that this new version is the definitive version because Matsuno is on board and you've got feedback from fans about how they liked the original and also how they liked the War of the Lions script. I think this new version takes a lot of the great elements of both and combines them into something that's familiar but also still feels a bit new. So is there any new line or translation from this edition of the game that really stuck out to you?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's a specific line because there are so many different lines that are similar or just slightly adjusted. There's a conversation that happens when Fulmarv and Delita are talking to Ovelia after she's been kidnapped. They made some nips and tucks to that conversation. I think the Japanese was altered a bit, but that whole scene reads incredibly well. And also credit to Fulmar's voice actor, the whole voice acting team. I was not sure about this game getting voice acting, even though I love the Final Fantasy XIV voice acting, which I think has a lot of analogs with this performance. I just felt like it's watching this little diorama play in that scene. They showcase the verve and the interesting language and the interplay between the different characters and their roles is presented in an incredible way in that scene. There was one line, it was something like, "You have always been princess, she who should rightly rule this chaos-racked kingdom." I can't give you a highfalutin reason why I remember that line so well, but I just thought all of Fulmarv's dialogue in that scene was great. If I had to pick a particular scene, and I think a lot of the new dialogue, I have interesting feelings on the new dialogue they've inserted in some cases, because I actually think in some of the battles there's a bit too much of it, and I hate to say that about
Yes.
something that I really
I
love.
agree with you.
I think it's really well written, and I like that it is expanding characters, but I think the best example is when you fight the first Lucavi. Ramza and the Lucavi have 40 lines of dialogue back and forth or something in the middle of the battle. And it's great. I think that might have been gilding the lily a bit, where I'm like, okay, you've made the point. Each individual line is so well written, and I will take more of the Lucavi dialogue any day because I love what they do with the demons dialogue. It's funny because I'm so torn. More Matsuno stuff, more great localization, but then I'm like, this is really breaking the pace of this battle. Because I've played the game so many times, It doesn't really faze me. It's not like I'm eager to see what happens next because I know what happens next. But just thinking about it from a pacing perspective, it's interesting that one of the choices they made in this new version was to pad out some of the conversations in battles. In a lot of cases, they are actually adding something substantive and good. I like a lot of Agrias's new dialogue. I think it's great to let her feel like part of the proceedings. But sometimes in the battles, it's like, man, we are talking an awful lot right now.
Yeah, especially when you lose the battle and then you have to go back and then listen to it all again. But yeah, speaking of the dialogue, we got to circle back. You already mentioned it, but we got to focus. We got to hone in on this. We got to talk about the most famous line of the game, blame yourself for God. It happens very early in the game, and I started playing it at midnight once it unlocked here in Japan. And I did have work the next day, but I thought I got to get to this line first before I can go to bed. So for those who are out of the know and without spoiling anything, a princess gets kidnapped and the kidnapper basically says, it's not our fault. And then in the original game, he says, quote, blame yourself or God, which is, again, a great line just to take out of context. And it is maybe one of the most famous lines in the game. It was retranslated in War of the Lions as, "'Tis your birth and faith that wronged you, not I." And in this enhanced version, it is, "If you feel wronged, blame yourself or the Father, capital F Father." So 3 completely new sentences for this one line. So which version of this iconic line do you prefer?
I still prefer the War of the Lions version, but like I said earlier, part of the issue is that a lot of people don't remember this. The War of the Lions version of the line is different because it's in a different context than the original. It takes place on the in-game map, and Delita is riding a chocobo with Ovelia on the back of it, and he's talking to Agrias. So he's being a little more harsh with her. And so in the War of the Lions version, it happens, and you can see this version in Ivalice Chronicle if you watch the cutscenes. All of the War of the Lions cutscenes are included in the Chronicle. Yes. And he's talking to Ovelia, not Agrias. So he's a little softer and a little gentler. First of all, for that context, the line makes more sense presented more gently. Another thing that I always harp on is that in the original, it's a mistranslation. He says, what do we not? So he's saying, like, my bad. He's not saying tough. That has always really bothered me because at that point in the story, Delita is trying to build a bond with Ovelia. Obviously, he's kidnapping her, but he is being more gentle. So I think it works because he's talking to Agrias. So when it says, like, oh, tough, deal with it. It doesn't work in that context. To me, it's always just bothered me because that's not what he's saying. He is being kind of a gentleman knight there. And obviously, he's a kidnapper and he's going to go on to do all of these Machiavellian machinations and things like that. But it always just bothered me once I learned Japanese and read it. He's saying, like, I'm sorry, this is just the way of things. This is the world we live in, and that's why I'm doing this. I like the War of the Lions version. I like the context it's presented in, but again, it wouldn't necessarily work if it was the original context because he's talking to someone different. I hate to say this because it's a great localization. It might be the weakest version of the line. I don't envy them having to make this decision because it's really hard when you're doing localization and you have lines that are really famous and really beloved. And if there is a technical reason why you would change them, or, I actually don't know what the Japanese script here is either. So I'm not sure if they changed the Japanese or not. So I'd have to double check that. But to me, I think it's definitely trying to hew closer to the original localization for the fans of that. And it's not an incorrect translation. It works well. I think overall, it doesn't stick out as being wrong. And in particular, somebody who is not a turbo nerd like me, who has played all the versions of this game over almost 30 years and built a career because he thought it was cool. The average player is going to read that and be like, cool. Yep, that's a good line, whatever. And I think it's less punchy than the PS1 version because it's kind of trying to ride the middle. There was the Game Boy Advance version of Final Fantasy VI had a lot of similar split the difference type things. The original Final Fantasy VI was localized by Ted Woolsey and is, in my opinion, a pretty solid localization given the era it came out in. Final Fantasy III, I guess, when it came out here. There's a number of lines that are really distinctive. Like Kefka says, like, son of a submariner. And there are these dream demons later in the character Cyan's backstory that have him trapped in like a nightmare thing. And they named the demons in English Mo, Larry, and Curly, which is not what they are. If I recall, it's been a minute, but I think I'm pretty sure in Japanese they're named 3 different loan words for sleep, I think, or dream. I have to double check, but they heavily localized it for the original FF3. And on the Game Boy Advance version, they did this same sort of thing where they split the difference, where they called them, it was like Molax, Curleon, and like Larian or something. It's tough because localization changes with the times and like the conventional wisdom about how to handle these problems, and the amount of resources have varied so much over the years that like I would never criticize why anyone makes any decision in a localization because there are so many factors involved. It could have been a corporate mandate that said keep the Super NES one but make it sound more, in context of the world or something. There's so many things that could have been responsible for that. I would not criticize this new Ivalice Chronicle version of Delita's line because A, I don't know if the Japanese changed. That would be a big factor. It's doing what it needs to do for this version of the game at this point in time, and it functions well in that context. When you divorce the line from its context and we're just comparing three versions of a game developed with a decade in between each of them or something like that, it's not always as instructive when you don't have that context. It's kind of just like, well, which one sounds cool? My feeling on that line is that I still prefer the War of the Lions version, asterisk, asterisk, asterisk.
Yes, and we've talked about the new dialogue that Matsuno added, and I think one of the more surprising additions for Western gamers is something that we also mentioned a bit earlier, is that the sound novels are finally in English. Can you touch on what the sound novels are?
The sound novels are really interesting. I hesitate to call them good, but that's kind of how they've always been. If you've ever played FF Tactics, you know that you can send your characters on errands, basically side jobs where you'll send three characters out, you walk around an apple bunch, come back, and they go, hey, we did the job. You get some fun little dialogue from your characters where they're like, 'twas a great success. And then you would get rewards, usually like money, items. Sometimes you would get artifacts that are like these special relics that don't do anything gameplay-wise, but they often were nods to the series. You could find locations like the Chaos Shrine from FF1, but in the FFT world. You can find lots of references to other Final Fantasies. In the original version of the Japanese game, certain relics would actually unlock sound novels where you go to this completely different screen. It's not quite a visual novel because there's a little more in terms of like odd mechanics in the background. It's not just like read the novel, make a choice every now and then. You have to sometimes make selections in terms of you're interacting with these odd game mechanics. And there's 4 of them, I believe. And so in every version of the game in English up until Ivalice Chronicle, they were just cut entirely. For fans of FF Tactics, we would love to see this, a complete version of the game with this material. I am sure the reason they were never localized is because it's just a bunch of text and it would add onto the localization budget for the game and take longer. And I think probably, I don't know what the budgets for any of these were, but my guess is that it was ancillary material. And a lot of it doesn't tie into the story of the world at all. My guess is that's why they got cut. This is not critical path material. This is not a situation like Tales of Legendia. Famously, like the second half of that game didn't get voice acting because they didn't realize it was the second half of the game. They just thought it was side content. This is not a situation like that. This is not material that is critical to your understanding of the story or the characters. Right. And so with Ivalice Chronicle, now that they're finally here, what excited me the most about them was that they're localized in the style of the rest of the game. To some extent, the text is a bit different, but they're localized with the same care and by the same team, bringing a lot of attention to detail and care to it. So I think that's really cool, and it's wonderful that they're here now. I've played the ones I've gotten, and I intend to play through all of them. They're kind of a pain. I had played years ago in the 2010s, maybe. Someone online had translated a couple of them and like made like a web applet out of them. So I had actually played one of them before. But yeah, they're interesting. I think they're worth playing, but they're very experimental. Different parts of the team got to work on it back in the day. I can't remember if My Hero wrote one of them. There was a lot of like, oh, cool, I get to do something for this game creatively. And so they kind of vary wildly in terms of quality, and mechanically they're a little strange. I wouldn't say they're bad. They're definitely worth playing, but I think the average player may not end up futzing with them much because it's so divorced from the rest of the game. They're kind of just this fun, pretty involved Easter egg. It's not like you're missing Matsuno lore in these books.
It is one of those things that kind of really only appeals to maybe hardcore Final Fantasy Tactics fans, but it is really interesting to see that they did go back and add it into the English version. And it kind of goes back to the, I guess, general concept of this game is that they wanted to make the ultimate version of the PS1 game. Not necessarily the ultimate version of Final Fantasy Tactics as a whole, but okay, let's go back to this PS1 version and see what could be changed or what could be added or what could be fixed, and then let's put that out.
That's a great way to put that.
So yes, the script adjustments are definitely a big deal for the FFT hardcores, but outside of that, what would you say is maybe the biggest new addition to this enhanced version?
For me, as someone who's played it a lot, the usability, like the UI is
Yes.
fantastic now. They've just surfaced a lot of detail and game mechanics type stuff that used to be very hard to get to or a pain to get to, and just brought it front and center so that you're spending way less time futzing with menus and like fighting the game, and you're just sort of making interesting strategic decisions. The turn order on the side of the screen is so much better than the old thing where you had to hit left and go down this text-based
Mm.
list. For those who didn't play the original or War of the Lions, to see the turn order, it was just a text-based list that you had to open separately. It was tedious to get to it. There were certain menus you couldn't access it from. It gave you the character names, which is great for your party, but in FFT, every enemy has a unique name. So I'm scrolling down the list and it's like, oh yeah, Mikkelhaos has a turn next. And I'm like, is Mikkelhaos this goblin? Is he another guy? Is he that sorceress that's about to blow me up? It was very like, all right, now I know the name. Now I got to scroll around the map and find out which one of these people is called Mikkelhaos. So that thing, I think, makes such a huge difference in allowing people to make strategic decisions. In addition to some of the adjustments they made to classes in terms of charge time and allowing archers to actually be kind of functional, mages are way deadlier now and way more helpful because their spells don't take as long to cast. That actually has ramifications throughout the whole game balance that I think have more impact than people would have
Mm.
realized when they said they were doing the PS1 version. It's just so much more playable. The main menu feels really good. Every character has a set of equipment and loadout slots, so you can quickly swap back to I'm going to go fight a hard battle
Mm.
build, so I don't have to manually change all my gear, change all my abilities. They expanded the number of characters you could have in the party, which War of the Lions also did that, but just something that they needed to do from the original. They added a button to destroy all eggs in your inventory automatically. In the OG and in the War of the Lions version, when you have a monster in your party, the monster can randomly lay eggs. And it's based on the amount of time you spend traveling between areas, not actual in game time, but every time you walk across a place on the world map. And to complete errands, you have to walk across the world map. So you could, if you weren't paying attention, be unable to recruit somebody because you accidentally walked around for 30 days and you have 60 chocobo eggs in your inventory or 60 full grown
Yes.
chocobos. So this new edition makes it a lot easier to be like, all right, if I want a chocobo egg, I will opt in to getting a monster
Mm.
egg. But otherwise, I don't have to worry about deleting characters out of my party every 30 days of in game
Mm.
time. I still forget to do it. So still have a million chocobos everywhere. Yeah, so the gist is just the UI stuff. I don't think I, as a fan of the original, appreciated how rickety some of it. It's almost 30 years old,
Yes.
and I think as a fan, because I know the game, I'm like I know where all the stuff is that I need to access. But playing it now, I'm just like this is so breezy to play. It's just so easy to be like, hey, I'm an archer. I want to cast an aim skill. When's my character's next turn going to come up? And then they have numbers that you can set it so that above every unit is their turn number. So you can just see right away, all right, sixth in the turn order, I'm going to shoot off a fire spell. This guy is, ninth in the turn order, so I'll be able to hit him. And in tactician mode, the enemy can actually use that. You have to use that even more because, for example, sometimes you can target the ground with a healing spell. So if an ally you want to heal is out of your range, like to target them directly, but you could target the ground and like it'll stretch far enough to hit and heal them. You have to be careful with that now, watching the timings because the enemy on tactician is really smart and they will actually walk into the heal spell for you. Or even
Mm.
worse, if say you're targeting, some enemy directly with like a big powerful damage spell that's AoE. In tactician mode, they will actually walk into your party so that way you blow up your whole party when you cast that spell. So there's so many different ways that the adjustments to speed and the ability to get a faster readout on when people are going to get their turns charged, all the core information is just presented so much more easily that you are fiddling with buttons and menus a lot less for a game that is essentially all fiddling with buttons and menus. As a result, that just distills it down to you're doing the good stuff all the
Mm.
time. You're building your characters, getting job points, you're doing this really fun sort of. It's one of those games that so many people who are like, I hate grinding, and then I played FF Tactics. I'm like, yep, that's what this version has allowed to come to the surface. The really good stuff with minimal kind of fiddling with all of it.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I feel the new UI changes really help the flow of the game and improve readability both in and out of battles. Every menu has completely been revamped and streamlined. And there are way less buttons you need to press, and it's much more readable thanks to the new UI icons as well, which are really helpful. And yeah, new menus is not a flashy thing to brag about when you make a new version of a game, but it does benefit the game in quite a big way. Going back to that original trailer, I feel like, the original trailer, it kind of undersold what they added, but it is kind of, we have new menu buttons or new menu icons. It's not a very flashy thing to showcase, but it works so well when you're actually playing the game. Many of the new additions are like that. They don't reinvent the game, but they do touch on a lot of pain points that the original had. So some other new additions, there's new difficulty levels. Some classes and abilities were rebalanced. There's autosave. There's a more of a top-down camera. There's fast forward, and you can undo movement now. You can also see the field a bit more clearly before a battle, so forth and so on. So again, a lot of the stuff, it doesn't sound exciting on paper, but it really helps the flow of the game. I do wish there was a toggle for fast forward and not a button you hold down, but that does seem like something that they could theoretically patch in. And yeah, I can't lie, I would have liked new classes. Even just one new class would have been exciting. Again, the devs, they want to maintain the integrity of the original game. But for me, I'm like, let's throw in Blue Mage, let's throw in Dark Knight, etc. They wanted to focus on what is in the game, as opposed to let's just add a bunch of random new stuff. When I'm playing it, it's got the fantastic story, it has so many memorable characters and scenes, but I feel like the heart of the game is the job system because it's so incredibly deep and flexible. Going back to what I said earlier, I don't really replay a lot of RPGs because it feels like there's some flexibility, but they're fairly linear in their structure. But with Final Fantasy Tactics, no party is going to be remotely the same. My party and your party are going to be totally different. And the game really encourages experimentation. And while there are optimized builds and things that are pretty broken, it doesn't try to restrict the player when it comes to doing what you want. If you look at the most popular strategy RPG series, that's Fire Emblem, a game that is flexible in how you build a character, but also very limiting in some ways, like how you switch classes. But in Tactics, swapping classes is pretty much free form, and you can swap classes pretty much anytime you want with no penalty. And you will need to be doing that for a single character many, many times. Do you have a favorite job class from the game in Final Fantasy Tactics?
Yeah, Monk. Easy. That's a quick one. Monk with ninja dual wield. If you don't mind, I wanted to go to something you said. You mentioned Fire Emblem, and I think it's telling that the Fire Emblem that is the best selling, which I believe now is Three Houses, is the one that is the most like Final Fantasy Tactics. Because I have liked the Fire Emblem series. I've always just liked strategy RPGs. But Three Houses, I think, is the one that broke containment, not just because of the character dialogue, because I think that is a big factor in terms of the support conversations and the ability to sort of persona-style life sim it.
Yes.
But I also think a big part of it was that that's where they broke open the combat system and really give you a lot of flexibility in what classes your characters are and in mixing and matching things. And to me, I was like, this is the one that's the most like FF Tactics. So I guess that's why the gameplay to me is both incredibly easy and also very fun.
Yeah, I never really thought about that, but I definitely agree because one of the joys of Three Houses is that you can really change their path much, much quicker than you could in past Fire Emblem games. For example, there's a character where halfway through the game, I changed them into a mage. In past Fire Emblem games, that was, you kind of have a route and there are some branching forks, but they're not as wide as in Tactics.
Yeah, and the economy of experience points is also very different in Three Houses versus Classic Fire Emblem. Classic Fire Emblem is almost like a survival horror game in that you are given a very limited resource of experience points. And Classic Fire Emblem, what I always loved about it, and the same thing I love about my favorite Resident Evil games, is that it becomes a resource management question. You have a certain set of weapons that break down, you have items that are finite, but also your experience is finite. You cannot grind your characters until, I think Awakening is when they added free battles, but the Classic Fire Emblem is very much a question of like, did you accidentally give all of your XP to the knight guy that you start the game with who's jacked up and overpowered? Well, now all your other characters are super weak. And that is very impenetrable from a design perspective, but it's also very rewarding when you get to the end of that game and you have successfully been like, oh, I built up my crappy little guy instead of the big guy, and now my whole party can fight well. And I think I've always liked that and felt like that was part of the series identity. So it's funny that I say I had the most fun playing Three Houses, but I still missed what the series had been. I think some of my favorite entries are like the GameCube ones, where it was kind of a balance between the more modern stuff that they have in like Fire Emblem Three Houses and the classic, very punishing, finite amounts of XP and things like that. I've always thought that was an interesting development for that series
Yeah,
because it's had so many more entries than Final Fantasy Tactics.
yes, they definitely have. I wish there was a world where Final Fantasy Tactics was as popular as Fire Emblem, or at least that Square considered it as important as Fire Emblem did. But
Well, I'll tell you what, we have that power now.
yes,
Everyone who's listening to this, go out and buy 3 copies of Ivalice
yes.
Chronicles. They could probably make more if this sells well, so just go out and buy a bunch. I did my part.
Since there are technically 2 versions of the game in this bundle, I think Square should count it as the sales are doubled. They should just double the number and be like, okay, well, it sold 5 million copies, so we got to make another one.
Yes, they do. They should. They just need to let Matsuno. I don't want to make it seem like Matsuno is the one creative genius behind all of it. He is a major factor, but the whole team is a big part of why FF Tactics is the way it is.
Of course. And yeah, going back to favorite classes, yeah, arithmetician or calculator in the original game, it's not my favorite per se, but it is an undeniable example of just how wacky you can get with builds. It is such an unorthodox class, and the game really starts picking up in terms of experimentation once you start unlocking these more unusual classes that go beyond, your typical tank, healer, DPS mold. And so I'm sure a lot of people are picking up the game for the first time now. So do you have any tips for people who are jumping into the series with the Ivalice Chronicles?
I have a whole thread of them actually on Blue Sky from a couple of weeks ago. I did have that exact thought. But yeah, I definitely have a couple of thoughts. You had mentioned the arithmetician. And what's interesting about FF Tactics, and that I think is still a little bit hard to grasp for a new player, is that whatever class you are in, whatever job you're in when you level up, that's what determines your stats as you level up. So, for example, if you level up as a knight, you're going to get more HP. You're going to get stronger, tankier. If you level up, and I recommend this, as a ninja, you get a ton of speed. And a ninja is one of the few classes that can actually increase your speed from leveling up. This creates a wild meta late game because there are traps and monsters that can reduce your level. People will create these absurd power builds where they will level up as a character like Ninja to get all the stat bonuses, and then level down as a character like Arithmetician because Arithmetician has the worst speed in the game. The stats you lose when you level down are based on your current job. So you can level up to 99 and back down to 1 over and over again, and your base stats get a little higher every time. It's unnecessary, but that is worth bearing in mind. And that's where some of the really interesting meta comes from. What makes this game so long-lasting and fun to play is that it is just this collection of systems that are incredibly permissive of what the player wants to do. I weirdly compared it to Baldur's Gate 3, not in terms of its immersive elements or anything like that, but just in terms of the way you interact with the world follows a set of rules, and you can break those rules to your advantage, and it's fun. And the enemies can do it in interesting ways too. What I recommend is when you get that job, they are so slow. They will get like 1 turn to everyone else's 3. The trick with Arithmetician actually is to spend as little time as possible being an Arithmetician, for me anyway, is to learn all their skills and then jump to one of the other mage classes, maybe like a black mage or something, or a time mage, and they have way better stats and they're faster, but then you can equip Arithmetician as your secondary ability. Then you have better stats all around, but you're still using those same overpowered abilities. So that's how you can end up with like an endgame black mage that is using arithmetics to cast Holy and do, hit everyone on the battlefield with Holy. My fondest memory every time I play the game is when I managed to set up an arithmetician build that hits my entire party and the enemy and kills everyone, and I game over. But under my terms,
yes.
I made the decision. I think the advice for new people is remember that if you level up your guy as a knight and then you swap him to a black mage, he's going to have really low magic. You don't necessarily have to keep a character on a physical or magical path, but you need to bear in mind that you're leveling up in an even fashion. That's how you can create interesting hybrid builds. The samurai actually derives its damage from magic rather than physical attack power. All the samurai Iaido abilities where you unleash the power of a sword, it's actually a good idea to turn your black mage into a samurai because it will do more damage because the black mage has leveled up their magic attack power. It's also heavily influenced by gear. But so that's when, sometimes it could seem like, oh, this character is really bad on their core job at their core ability. But if I pop it onto another job, for again, another example, Thief is pretty quick, but Sealing is based on speed. So actually it makes the most sense to learn all the Thief abilities and then be a ninja because the ninja can steal better than a thief. So, there's a lot involved with that. I think Ivalice Chronicle especially has removed some of the sort of, you could walk yourself into a corner and never be able to get out of it. because you can always go back to the world map and there's the retry function and you can always adjust your loadout. That might be one of the greatest successes of Ivalice Chronicle for a new player, is that it's a lot less punishing. It's hard for me because people always talk about FF Tactics as this very challenging game. And I'm a little biased because, for example, there's a boss fight in the middle of the game where you have to one-on-one a really powerful guy.
Right.
For some people, that was game-breaking. I have to start the game over because it's at the end of a sequence of fights that you can't back out of. But also, it's just very challenging because he's strong and he's aggressive. When I was a kid, I never knew that because I was a monk. I had just lucked into picking a monk, and I had learned the dual wield ability on ninja, so I was a double punch monk. My Ramza was punching people for like 100 damage and doing it twice, and he was fast, and he had a self-heal, and a ranged attack, because Monk has an incredible kit. They have healing, they have support. Like, Monk can kind of do everything themselves. I fought that guy, walked up to him, and punched him really hard and killed him. So I was just like, oh, that was a neat little scripted moment. And it wasn't until I played it again years later and made Ramza something like a black mage where I was like, oh my god, what is happening here? This is so difficult. That's the strength of the game, where you can have such a wildly different experience depending on how you've chosen to do it. People have found ways to fight that boss with builds that would be at a disadvantage. And that's, to me, that kind of theory crafting is really fun. Ivalice Chronicle has made things like that. Particularly that battle has allowed people to experiment a little more without it being quite as punishing. It's still difficult, but it's a bit more variable and not actively hateful towards the player's time.
Yeah, it can definitely be pretty tough at the beginning. The second mission of the game has you protect an NPC, and he can legit die on turn 2 if you didn't place the right units in the correct location. For newcomers who are jumping into the game now, I would say get auto potion and get JP boost as soon as possible. Those will really help a lot.
Yes.
And yes, you can grind in the game. So there's quote unquote infinite XP. So use that to your advantage. And there is a new difficulty level. You can go, I think the default is Knight. And there's also I think Tactician is the hardest one. And maybe Squire is the easiest one. So if you do get in a jam, you can just switch that down to an easier difficulty if you want. And I would say this is definitely a fun game to grind in because the generic battles let you experiment a bit more with your units. And the actual battles are a good mix between being kind of fairly easy, but still throwing a curveball at you every now and then, the generic field battles. And you also get to encounter a lot of the classic Final Fantasy monsters here that look really amazing in this art style. And yeah, going back to the art style a little bit, originally when I first saw it, I thought, oh no, they put the Vaseline filter on it, which they did with the mobile ports. But when you're actually playing it, I think it looks quite good. The portraits and characters are cleaned up. They are still a little pixely, a little jaggy, a little blurry, which is what you want. You don't want it to be completely 100% smooth. You want a little bit of the chunk in there. The maps are very smooth, but again, I think they do kind of look nice. They don't look like they have the Vaseline filter on them. It looks like a human went and touched it up a little bit.
Well, and I think just to comment on what you said, everything looks like it fits together.
Yes.
Like, a big complaint of FF7, 8, and 9, without the incredible Moguri mod, is that the remasters of them, remaster in scare quotes, the 3D models are so high resolution, but the backgrounds are so washed out. Unlike the original games where everything blended so well, nothing goes together in a way that it really is against the original artistic intent. And that's all they could do given what exists of the material in those games. But in this new version of FFT, which they also didn't have the source code for, they took great pains to make sure the characters still feel grounded in the world space in a way that you don't always get with remasters. I think that goes a long way to making it feel well put together visually.
All right, let's talk about the future of Final Fantasy Tactics. What do you foresee as the future of the series?
If I were going to bet, it would be that if this does well, we'll probably get a remaster of Tactics Advance and Tactics Advance 2 as like a bundle. I don't know if they would put as much attention into it as they did with this one, but maybe. I think those entries are more polarizing. They have a lot of strengths. When they came out, I was a little mad because I was like, I want this to be like Final Fantasy Tactics. But on their own merits, those games are quite cool and have really interesting stories in their own right. They're just a different kind of story than Final Fantasy Tactics. They're very oriented towards a single character, and they're not about world machinations or things like that. It's about the personal emotions of a small group of people. I think, personally, the most likely thing is that we get remasters of those games And then if those somehow do well, which I would like them to, although I question if they would do as well as this one, I don't even have any sense of how this one is doing, although I hope it's good. I think they would love to make a sequel. I would hold my breath that we get one anytime soon, because FF Tactics historically does not seem to sell the numbers that the corporation wants it to sell to get sequels. But I worry that by saying that, I will manifest it into being. I also would love to see them patch this game a little bit. That team, FF14's team, CBU3, they went back to FF16 and they touched it up several times. And of course, they're always updating Final Fantasy XIV. It's a little different because that's an ongoing online game. But I wouldn't mind if they came back and added some more QOL stuff to this. It's hard to imagine they would do this given that their mission statement was we want to do the definitive version of the PS1 game. But it would be cool if they did a DLC or some sort of additional content that added something new for the post game. I think what I would love most is a new game plus, because by the time you get to the end, you have this jacked party. There's not much game left. I think it would be really fun to roll your party over into a new game plus with enemies that leveled up more. I feel like that would be really rewarding for a game that's so mechanically rich and interesting to play with. So I would love to see them add something like that. I wouldn't say no to some additions. You had mentioned this earlier. I think the end game actually is kind of impacted by the removal of the War of the Lions content. War of the Lions added some additional stuff for certain characters who didn't get good closure. More importantly, endgame jobs they added, and like certain characters like Balthier and Luso did, and then some of the items and different things did actually kind of give you more to do with the endgame. My issue with the OG and with this version is that once you get to arithmetician and the last few jobs, your job growth kind of stops, because it's like, all right, I have all the jobs now, and there's nothing to build towards in that last chunk of the game. My characters are built. There's no Dark Knight where I need to get X number of kills and do XYZ to unlock this job, or the Onion Knight where maxing out a job makes it more powerful. So that was always really fun in terms of a metagaming thing to do at the very end, where it's like, all right, I've already solved the game and my party members can win every fight. So what am I building towards? To me, being able to build towards those ultimate classes, game breaking though they may have been, did give you some additional character growth options in the last hours of the game. So I would love to see them, I don't know, DLC an option to be like, add War of the Lions jobs or something, a checkbox or something.
Yeah, I definitely agree that a remaster of Final Fantasy Tactics Advance and A2, probably the most likely route that the franchise takes. But then after that, you're out of games you can remaster. So hopefully we do see a brand new Final Fantasy Tactics game in the future. So final question, let's say they announce Final Fantasy Tactics 2, for example, and you can put one job class in the game. What job class are you picking?
Machinist as a fully fleshed out job that is not a unique job. Mustadio is great. I love him. But Machinist has 3 abilities, and then he's a squire. I would love a Machinist that's kind of based on the FF14 mechanics of a Machinist, like you build a turret or you build like a pet type thing. Like the turret is essentially a pet. But it would be really cool to have an FF Tactics where it's like, oh yeah, my Machinist is, I summon another unit, all my abilities allow me to overdrive. Like, oh, now this turn it can do more damage, or oh, this turn it can fire a beam that deals status effects, or something like that. It was like the animation, I just anticipated being cute little FFT sprite of a guy whacking the machine with a wrench or something. I feel like that would be a fun addition, especially if the game had the kind of mechanical depth and openness that the original FF Tactics has. I think the Machinist would be really fun.
I'm going to go with Pictomancer. I always thought that was just such an interesting class in the Final Fantasy series as a whole. That's not used a whole lot, although they did add it to Final Fantasy XIV not too long ago. So I say bring Pictomancer back. But
that's a great one. I would love that.
In the meantime, until that fateful day where you can be Pictomancer in Final Fantasy Tactics, you can play Final Fantasy Tactics, the Ivalice Chronicles right now. Highly recommended from me. It would be a little bit better if they had Pictomancer, but as it is, it's a great game. So definitely, listeners, check it out. So Stephen, thank you so much for joining me. Where can people find you?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for having me as well. It's been really nice to talk to you about this. People can find me on Blue Sky. I am SJMTAELUS, SJM Talus. You could find me at my professional website, sjmtalus.com. And yeah, that's probably the easiest way to get in touch with me. Easy to find.
Great. And the links to everything are in the podcast description, so listeners, check it out. Stephen Meyerink, once again, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Today's feature is about Sega Store Tokyo, the newly opened merged store in Shibuya. And if you've ever been to Shibuya or are a longtime podcast listener, I think you can pinpoint its exact location. That's right, it's in the super popular shopping complex Shibuya Parco, home of Nintendo Tokyo, Capcom Store Tokyo, Pokemon Center Shibuya, and many other nerdy stores, and now Sega has moved in. This was announced late last year, kind of in an offhanded comment by Sega Transmedia boss Justin Scarpone. It was during an interview with VGC about putting Sega in front of consumers more, and he said, quote, "We're opening up a Sega store next summer in Parco." Kind of vague because there are a lot of Parcos, but one could assume it was the Shibuya one. A very strange way to announce the store. Like, Sega didn't follow up with more information immediately after this. He just kind of said it was happening, and we had no new info for many, many months, but then it happened. The store opened up in late July, and about a month beforehand, Sega said, yeah, we're opening up a store in Shibuya Parco. I went there around this time, and there was construction with "now loading" written in the Sega font on the outside walls of the store. Again, at this time, we had no date on when it will open, and it was also kind of just barely even publicly announced. I don't know why Sega can't be normal, but construction finished, it opened, I went, and now I'm going to talk about it. If you've ever been to Shibuya Parco, the 6th floor is called Cyberspace Shibuya, and it is basically a dedicated otaku floor with a big focus on video games. Just a few episodes ago, I talked about the Katamari Pop-Up Cafe on this very floor. Now, before it was getting built, the big question was, where are they even going to put it? The floor is pretty packed and it had no real room to expand. But they did the most logical thing. They replaced the GG Esports Cafe. This was a fairly huge area of the floor dedicated to a cafe and esports event space that I don't think anyone ever went to or was even aware of. Even I never went in there. It was always empty, and Parco alone has much better food options. Every now and then the cafe would close and they would turn it into a pop-up shop. I went to a Minecraft and Dragon Quest pop-up shop in this same space, but now that cafe is closed forever, being replaced by Sega Store Tokyo and a shop dedicated to JoJo. Yes, that JoJo. A few weeks before Sega Store Tokyo, Sega Store Shanghai opened, so we did get to see what a potential Sega store could look like. And yes, it does look similar to the Shanghai one. So, like with Nintendo Tokyo, they have locked in their aesthetic and will use it across several stores. And as a comparison to Nintendo stores, there are obviously many similarities conceptually. One of the more amusing things that I noticed is that the color scheme is kind of the opposite of Nintendo. The Nintendo stores focus heavily on red and white, but the Sega stores, blue and black. The Nintendo stores are very minimalistic and inviting, but the Sega store, it kind of looks like you're in a club. It's a little dark, there are neon lights. Sega is cool, okay? I do like the seemingly deliberate attempt to kind of do the opposite of what Nintendo is doing visually. And the more modern, neon, futuristic aesthetic does suit Sega more than it does Nintendo. But obviously, the inspiration for Nintendo is there in the layout. Like with the Nintendo stores, Sega Store Tokyo is kind of broken up by franchises. Nintendo Tokyo has these big statues of Mario, Inkling, and Link to show you where those IP's goods are, but Sega doesn't have statue money, and they just had to settle for signs on the walls. But there is one statue at the front of the store. Now, take a guess. Out of all the Sega characters, which one is most likely to have a statue? That's right, Shadow the Hedgehog. I guess we are still riding off the high from Sonic X Shadow's generations. It is just funny to think that the only statue there is of Shadow. You might think, well, isn't it obvious to split up the store by franchises? But the Capcom and Square stores don't have such hard delineations like that. Obviously, there is like a Mega Man shelf, but the goods are mixed in with everything else as opposed to being sectioned off. So Sega is really taking a page out of Nintendo Store's layout playbook. Now, I've been to the store twice so far, the first time being about 2 weeks after it opened. The first week required timed entry tickets and maybe even advanced reservations, so I was worried that I would get there at, say, 10:30, and then my timed entry ticket would be for 7 p.m. or something ridiculous like that. But fortunately, I was able to just walk right in about 14 days after they opened. My second trip a few weeks ago was also the same, so fortunately, you do not need to dedicate a huge chunk of your day to getting a new Like a Dragon t-shirt. The store is obviously much, much smaller than Nintendo Tokyo, and even smaller than Pokemon Center Shibuya. I would say it's maybe a little bigger than Capcom Store Tokyo though. And it has a very striking exterior with that big blue neon Sega logo and this big glass wall that often has hologram projections on it. The entrance is actually this small little passageway to the left of that big glass wall. It is kind of funny that smack dab in front of the store is this huge sign, and you kind of have to go around it. And the exit is to the right of that glass wall. So weirdly, that part is a little cramped since there is no back exit like with Nintendo Tokyo. So you step into what I would call the Sega logo merch area. Here you can buy sweaters, shirts, cups, and even plushies of the Sega logo. I mean, it's a great logo, one of the best in gaming. Again, going back to Nintendo Tokyo, I'm sorry, but I really do just have to compare everything to Nintendo Tokyo. And at the Nintendo stores, they really only have the store shirt in terms of quote-unquote logo merch. But Sega has quite a lot of things with the Sega logo slapped on it. Now, just how much is a sweatshirt with the Sega logo on it? 13,200 yen. And a common trend of this shop is that yes, many things are expensive. I suppose for all game merch stores that's true, but Sega definitely had a lot more items that were way more expensive than I would have guessed. The logo on the sweatshirt, it isn't ironed on, it is, I don't know if embroidered is the right term, but it is like a fuzzy 3D patch of the shirt. So it is higher quality than most, I presume, but it is pretty pricey for something that you would wear during laundry day. I did like the Sega logo plushie, which is just kind of a weird thing to make. It's just the logo on a white background. It is kind of shaped like a hot dog, so imagine a Sega logo hot dog. There's also stickers, pin cases, handkerchiefs, so if you want something with the Sega logo on it, you're covered. Also in this section is something I have never seen before, plastic models of Sega consoles from Bright Arts. I looked them up and they mostly seem to make figures for Square Enix. They might even be owned by Square, since when I googled them, I got immediately linked to Square's store, where ironically they sell these Sega consoles. So yes, you can buy figures of Sega consoles on Square's official online shop. What world are we living in? Also in this area are some of the major new items, Sonic plushies designed by artist Kosuke Kawamura. There are 3 of them, with 2 of them having kind of a graffiti aesthetic, and one of them has the character art for various Sonic characters printed on it. So instead of that beautiful blue coat, it's like the key art of Knuckles and such. The designs are very reminiscent of the special graffiti Pikachu when they opened up Pokemon Center Shibuya, but I gotta say the Pikachu looked way better. There's also a giant version of one of the plushies with Kawamura's signature on the bottom, continuing the trend of secret signatures hidden in game stores. Once you pass this little area, you go into the main store, where it's laid out broken up by Sega IPs. A few other things about the visual design. You've got some dark blue neon lights on the ceiling to give the store kind of a club vibe, which I mentioned earlier. And in the middle of the store is a glass floor with a big Sega logo under the floor. Again, they really love their logo. But I do like these more ambitious visual touches. Now on the left wall, what's the first IP you see? Come on, guess. What Sega IP would they lead with? That's right, Project Sekai Colorful Stage featuring Hatsune Miku. I think this is just called Hatsune Miku Colorful Stage in English, and it is a continuation of the Project Diva series. But basically it is a Miku merch area. Now keep in mind, Sega does not own Miku, but it is kind of a Dragon Ball and Namco thing where they are close enough. Namco makes Dragon Ball games, Sega makes the Miku games, so let's just throw her into the store. It is mostly just plushies of the characters and blind boxes for things like pin badges and whatnot. Not my wheelhouse, but it is just very unusual to see Miku here. And the IP right next to that one is also not in my wheelhouse, but one I am very fascinated by, and that is Love and Berry. This was an arcade dress-up game in the early 2000s by Sega, and recently the company has been pushing it yet again since it had its 20th anniversary last year. I definitely want to cover it on the podcast as soon as I find out who is the biggest Love and Berry expert who I can speak to in English. This is one of those card game arcade titles where you scan the cards into the machine and they unlock outfits and other stuff for the 2 characters. There was actually a DS game made by Indie Zero with a peripheral that let you scan the cards. I mean, is this not the perfect subject for the podcast? But in terms of what are Sega's biggest IPs, I don't know if Love and Berry makes the cut. Although maybe it does. Maybe during its peak, it made more money than any Like a Dragon game. It is interesting to see them focused on an IP that I would have to presume is very niche outside of Japan. Shibuya Parko isn't solely for tourists, but many tourists visit the fabled 6th floor for their otaku merch, but Sega is a-okay with heavily featuring an IP that is purely for the domestic market. They definitely had stuff here I had never seen before, like Love and Berry themed Rika-chan dolls. There were also blind boxes and clear folders and whatnot, but the Rika-chan dolls were definitely the most unique item, maybe in the entire store. Last IP on the left wall, it's Puyo Puyo. You've got your big Puyo Puyo plushies and whatnot, pin badges, stuff like that. Oh, and another new item I had never seen before, these big plastic blocks with box arts printed on them. The name on the tag was Acrylic Block, and this is kind of like an acrylic stand, but it's just a big square or rectangle. It's kind of like a big paperweight. The size is a bit bigger than your hand, and the price for this brick of plastic, you're going to be paying more than 2,000 yen for like a plastic coaster. Sorry, but no thank you. It is quite heavy though, so you could use it in self-defense. But they were selling like the box art for the Mega Drive Puyo Puyo games printed on these big blocks. So if you want that, they are selling it. And then finally, on the left side of the store, on the back wall, we see a section dedicated to a fairly under-the-radar Sega IP, Sonic the Hedgehog. Sonic merch is kind of spread out in the store. Like there's some near the entrance, and near the shadow statue in front, there's more. But there is a section on the back wall that is just dedicated to Sonic goods. The stuff that stood out to me are the Sonic branded Japanese souvenirs. Now, if Love and Berry has zero appeal to tourists, this stuff is pretty much here only for tourists. There's a foldable fan with Sonic and Mount Fuji with rings down the side of Mount Fuji. There's Sonic Unomi, those tall teacups, tatami coasters, tenugui, which are these long, thin towels, and shirts that blend Sonic in with traditional Japanese art. I mean, if you go to Japan, you're a Sonic fan, and you want some Sonic merch that looks like it came from Japan, this is it. Nab a shirt of Sonic sitting under the cherry blossoms with Mount Fuji in the background. And some more Sonic stuff. Again, pin badges, plushies, figures. Yes, the acrylic blocks are also here if you want to buy Sonic Adventure box art encased in plastic. You can find Sonic stuff pretty much anywhere in Japan, but the Japanese-themed Sonic goods were pretty cool and one of the best items in the store. Maybe the best, to be honest. Also on the back wall, near the right section, the Like a Dragon section. This was probably one of the more unpredictable areas in the store when it came to merch. Let's start with the big one. You can buy Kiryu and Majima hangers, like a clothes hanger. But under the hook is like a shirtless Kiryu or Majima, and you put your shirt on their shoulders. Now, in the Like a Dragon games, you're mostly ripping your clothes off, so this is a good swerve to actually put clothes on them. I would say there's a pretty good mix of merch from all the different Like a Dragon games. We have both the Kiryu and post-Kiryu characters featured heavily. And even though this is a franchise for adults, you can still, of course, buy plushies of the Yakuza characters. And yes, t-shirts that cost 9,900 yen. I've only played Yakuza 0, so I was pleased to find a lot of Zero-specific merch. Like they sell the keychains based on the cabaret Majima worked at. Now, the right wall was solely dedicated to Atlas games. Sadly, no Snowboard Kids, but there were sections based on Metaphor, Shin Megami Tensei 5, Persona 3, and Persona 5. Yes, we needed to split up the Personas. The Metaphor merch was fairly light since that is a newer game. Mostly some acrylic stands, some art, pin badges, and so on. I didn't notice anything super crazy or interesting. They didn't even have any plushies, can you believe that? Even Nahobino from Shin Megami Tensei 5 has a plushie. And the Shin Megami Tensei 5 section also has a lot of other figures and t-shirts. To be honest, the Alice areas in general were kind of sparse on the merch front. It was really just tons of plushie keychains of the Persona characters that took up a lot of space. But there are individual Persona 3 and Persona 5 clocks with music from those games, so somebody on the merch team is digging deep and getting a little silly. And I did see some Persona 5 playing cards, which did look quite nice. And then further down the wall is the register. Some other random observations. There was some collab between Like a Dragon and Red Bull, so they were selling Red Bull that came with acrylic stands at the store, which was just very strange. Like you can just see cans of Red Bull on display. And man, we really are under the boot of acrylic stands. I get it has to be the cheapest thing you could possibly make, but is anybody excited to buy these things? There has to be some hardcore collector out there. I just know it. I'm trying to think of some other visual things I want to highlight. Oh, at the front of the store, there are these gotcha machines with Sega stuff, and there is a big display of these plastic blue balls with the Sega plushies stuck in them, and the Sega logo plushies in the middle of this ball display. So yes, there are plenty of things to take a picture of, which I always appreciate. So you might ask, well, what did you buy? I've been to the store twice, and honestly, nothing. Listen, I like Sega. There are many Sega IPs I enjoy, but I have been trying to pull back on my game merch purchases a little bit until I move into a bigger place. And nothing stood out to me as, man, I gotta have that. I think if they had some food like Manju-shaped Sonic or something, I would bite. Or more affordable t-shirts. I also think the prices for a lot of these things are just too high to buy as just something that you would throw on a shelf or wear every now and then. I would love just a cool Sega t-shirt that wasn't absurdly expensive. That's fine. Sell me a 3,000 yen Burning Rangers t-shirt and I might pick it up. But if you are a hardcore fan for Sega IPs, there is stuff here to buy. I would say the Like a Dragon section is the biggest variety in terms of items I had never seen before. The Atlas section, honestly, maybe a little undercooked. Like if you're a huge Persona fan and you come here, what are you picking up? Maybe a plushie keychain and that's it. Unless you need a new clock. I think the issue with a lot of these stores is that they often simply stock items that you can already buy elsewhere. Square Enix Garden also kind of has this issue. Even the Nintendo stores are guilty of this, but even on day one, Nintendo had a ton of stuff you could only buy there. And now I would say maybe half or even more than half of Nintendo Tokyo features items you can only get there, which is not true of Sega just yet. Even Capcom Store Tokyo, which is smaller, probably has a better ratio of unique merch to existing merch at their store. But I am coming at this from the perspective of somebody who lives in Tokyo, and I can literally walk to a store and buy a Sonic plushie. As a one-stop shop to get Sega stuff, along with you getting Nintendo and Capcom and Pokemon and Jump stuff on the same floor, you can probably pick something up here and be satisfied. I do hope they dig a bit deeper into their IP well in the future and start investing into some more unique merch lines. Pokemon right now has a merch line based off of Escape, like the Escape menu selection during a battle. They made a whole merch line based off of this one thing. Sega has Sonic, and you can do a lot with that. So hopefully Sega Store Tokyo becomes the home of these really creative Sonic merch lines, along with their other IPs like a Dragon and Persona. Sega Store Tokyo final verdict. It is interesting. I like the aesthetic. Overall, maybe good, not great though. Again, I'm trying to think, if you are a hardcore Sega fan, is it worth making the trek to solely go to the store? Probably not, but again, this is on the same floor as Nintendo Tokyo, as Capcom Store Tokyo, as Pokemon Center Shibuya, as the Jump Store. Parco itself has a ton of other stuff to see and eat. It is definitely the perfect location for this type of store. If this was like on a back street in Shinagawa or something, it would be much tougher to recommend to seek out. But as a slice in the greater gaming pizza, it's worth taking a bite or two. I think the visuals do look great. They really went with something that was very distinct yet very Sega, but the merch options are not as fleshed out as I want them to be. But again, the store has only been open for a few months now, so let's see what they have in store for the store. Okay, that's the feature, so let's check out the news. Did you know that Pikmin are all around us? You should, and Nintendo reminded us of this fact via the Close to You videos made by Nintendo Pictures. This was a very strange release, as one day it just appeared on the Nintendo Today app. There was even a push alert for it, which I do have turned on, but rarely does Nintendo actually send out the alerts. But this time they were like, bro, you gotta see this. The original video showed a baby chasing around a pacifier that was seemingly floating in the air, concluding with the mom walking in, seeing the baby take its first steps. By the way, this baby was left unattended for a very, very long time. Parents, don't do this. Now, people were wondering what on earth this video could be, but I mean, the Pikmin music was in the video. It was 100% a Pikmin thing. I never doubted that it was Pikmin. If anyone said this was not going to be for Pikmin, I mean, the Pikmin music was in the short. Again, I cannot stress this enough. Those people clearly did not play Pikmin 1 through 4, which they should. And yes, the next day Nintendo released the exact same video, except this time you could see the Pikmin. And oh, by the way, this was just a random thing Nintendo Pictures made. I assume they were hyping up more Pikmin shorts, and maybe those are coming, but this was really just a one-off thing, it seems. But it is ambiguous as to what Nintendo Pictures is actually going to make. Short marketing videos? Video game cutscenes? Full-fledged movies? Maybe a bit of everything? I guess you start small and then go from here. I think you do need an animation studio the size of Illumination to make an actual film, so I don't think Nintendo Pictures is a year away from announcing a Pikmin movie, but I am curious to see what IPs they can make material with. Nintendo Fukuoka is opening up on November 14th. This is the 4th Nintendo store in Japan. We don't have any pics just yet, so I do wonder if it will have a more unique design like Nintendo Kyoto, but I would definitely, somehow, some way, cover it on the podcast. But if you're down there, you can also partake in Happy Holidays in Hakata with Super Mario, an illumination display at JR Hakata City. This is very similar to the Super Mario Bright Holiday event in Tokyo last year, but it doesn't seem like a carbon copy. I had a lot of fun at that event last year, and yes, I did cover it on the podcast, so go check out that episode. But it is interesting to see that Nintendo is making a big marketing push in Kyushu this holiday. Hey, don't forget about Tokyo. Yes, I know we have everything, but we could always use more. But fortunately, Capcom has our back because the exhibit Capcom Creation Moving Hearts Across the Globe is coming to Tokyo at the Creative Museum on December 20th. This is a huge Capcom exhibit showcasing the history of the company, along with a lot of development documents, interactive exhibits, and photo ops. It was originally only in Osaka, but it has expanded to other cities, with Tokyo being the last one later this year. Tickets are on sale now, and apparently they have been on sale since mid-September, so this completely flew under my radar. I think only the opening weekend requires advance tickets, though, and the other days are same-day tickets, so I don't think this is going to be some crazy thing where you need to book a month ahead of time. People have asked if I was going to cover it on the podcast because apparently it is quite good, and I would definitely make my way over there and talk about it on the podcast, so don't worry. But in the meantime, let's go ahead and wrap up. Thanks as always for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe to this podcast on your favorite app. Leave a 5-star review as well, it really helps. This podcast is also available on YouTube, so like and subscribe there as well. I'm on Twitter, Threads, Blue Sky, Instagram. Just search for Tokyo Game Life or find the links in the podcast description. If you like the podcast, be sure to share it with your friends and on social media. The next episode will be on November 2nd. And yes, I will be talking about Pokemon. See you next time. Matane!